On Friday, the University of Michigan released its preliminary consumer sentiment report for the month of August. According to the research, sentiment fell for the first time in 4 months, due largely to concerns over inflation. Joanne Shu, director of the Surveys of Consumers for the University of Michigan, joins me now. Joanne, welcome to NYSE TV Live.
Thanks for having me.
Joanne, can you walk us through what this survey is designed to measure and tell us what the most recent report revealed?
Absolutely. The University of Michigan has been measuring consumer attitudes towards the economy since 1946. So we have a very long history of data on how people feel about business conditions, their personal finances, the current state of the economy, and the future of the economy, including inflation. And what a long body of research has shown is that consumer sentiment, consumer expectations tend to be a leading indicator for the economy. And that's one reason why our monthly measurements are so closely followed. So over the course of 2025, we've seen a pretty broad-based decline in sentiment that reached a trough in May, and that very much followed consumer worries about tariffs and the uncertainty and high levels of tariffs that were threatened. As that tariff rhetoric calmed down a little bit over the summer, we saw an improvement as well as a sideways movement in consumer sentiment. And this month in August, for the first time in several months, we actually saw another decline. And again, this was attributable to concerns about inflation as well as concerns about the current state of high prices that consumers faced.
Joanne, can you speak a little bit more about how consumers are viewing the latest tariff developments?
Consumers have their attention has really been captured by tariffs with respect to the economy. And this is largely because consumers have been worried about prices and inflation since the pandemic. That's been the #1 factor on consumers' minds. And of all the different things that are happening in the economic world right now and in the policy world, tariffs are seen as one that really poses the biggest threat to the prices that consumers pay. They continue to be frustrated by high prices. They're waiting for inflation to continue slowing. But with the recent ramp up in tariff rhetoric, the implementation of tariff hikes on many countries, and the lack of a resolution in China, consumers are really quite worried that inflation is going to come surging back in the next year.
Well, you know, the July CPI inflation data was recently released and it didn't spike, but it sounds like you expect or consumers expect it to do so in the coming months. Is that right?
That's correct. So back in April and May, consumers, with the announcement of the so-called reciprocal tariffs, consumers were bracing for a worst-case scenario. So that worst-case scenario has not actually come to pass. So over the summer, consumers kind of breathed a little bit of a sigh of relief that that worst-case scenario didn't seem to be happening at the time. But since that tariff rhetoric and the tariff developments have not actually quieted down, they've picked up a little bit. Consumers are expecting inflation to come bouncing back over the next year, and they're already perceiving some lifting of inflation on current prices, as we see in their questions about personal finances and questions about big ticket purchases. So I think consumers are very much in touch with the prices that they're seeing around them, and they're very much paying attention to that.
And based off of your report, 60% of consumers say they're expecting unemployment to get worse. Why has this metric spiked so high, and what do you think it means for people's spending habits?
Consumers are really concerned really about the potential impact of tariffs. They're not just worried about what it's going to do to prices, but they also recognize that when tariff policy is uncertain and unsettled, that it's really hard for businesses to plan. And that means that businesses are unlikely to be hiring in a robust way. And so consumers are expecting the volatility in the economy and economic policy to pass through not just to higher prices, but also to a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the macroeconomy. So unlike 2022, when they felt terrible about the economy, but were willing to keep spending through it because labor markets were tight and consumers felt their incomes were reliable, in this current moment, they're quite worried that labor markets are going to weaken and that their income prospects just aren't as strong as they used to be. So it's a little bit difficult to see how consumers have the confidence to continue spending when they are perceiving some weakness, not just with respect to a return of inflation, but also with respect to labor markets and their own incomes.
Joanne, how do you collect the data for this survey every month?
We select a random sample of postal addresses from around the country, and we collect those interviews via web. Each invitation has a QR code or a URL that consumers can click on or reach to complete in the interview at their leisure. We get over 1,000 interviews approximately every month. We've been doing this on a monthly basis since 1978, and a little bit less frequently since 1946. So we just have an incredibly long history to track the views of consumers and how that actually connects to the wider economy.
And Joanne, in 30 seconds, is there anything you'd like viewers to know further about this survey this month?
Is essentially consumers are quite concerned about tariffs, but what their views aren't necessarily a foregone conclusion. If the policy environment changes, if inflation continues to remains not to spike, consumer views may very well change in the future.
Thank you to Joanne Shu, Director of the Surveys of Consumers for the University of Michigan.
Thank you very much.